Good evening and welcome. I'm Ann Kirshner, president of Hunter College. Welcome to this special program. And welcome to Roosevelt House at Hunter College, which is the perfect venue for this gathering to talk about transportation policy under the auspices of our unique Kiel Transportation Policy Program. Why is it the perfect venue? Well, first, Hunter College is one of the busiest commuter schools in the entire country, perhaps the busiest. I'd like somebody to check that number. Who, if not us, then who, right? We've got 23,000 students at Hunter College, and the vast majority of them arrive by public transportation every day, mostly through the subway. Second of all, you're in the very birthplace of modern infrastructure. That is the idea of putting people to work while extending and preserving the transportation spine of the nation. You're in the building where FDR and Eleanor lived for 25 years, with FDR's mother, Sarah, living right next door. And this was the headquarters for FDR's presidential transition in late 1932. And his library, just 3 floors up, was the room where it happened, the room where the New Deal was invented. So the New Deal was born right in this building, and so was the Works Progress Administration and the Public Works Administration, history-making policy decisions that resulted in the construction of the LaGuardia Airport, the RFK Triborough Bridge, the FDR Drive, tearing down the L, creating the F line, constructing new subway stations under 6th Avenue from Delancey Street all the way up to Rockefeller Center, upgrading our ferries, and not to mention a new building, or it was new building then, for Hunter College, the North Building, which was dedicated by none other than President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So that's the kind of far-sighted urban planning that our Kiel program and our distinguished Kiel fellows have been directing for the last 9 years. As a lifelong New Yorker, I hear the name Ted Kiel, and it evokes a lot of memories for me. So let me start with a few words about the leader whose accomplishments and vision animate what we do every day in New York City, the great Theodore W. Kiel. Ted, as everyone apparently called him, so I can call him that. Is that okay? I'll call him that too. Served as counsel to several presidents, and no surprise, Roosevelt was the very first he served as a rising young lawyer. He went on to become not only one of New York's most successful attorneys, but a legendary labor mediator. For every mayor locked in tough negotiations with a municipal union, and for every newspaper publisher stuck in a protracted strike with organized labor, it was Ted Kiel who became the ultimate peacemaker. His interests and achievements extended to a wide array of causes, including, of course, transportation. 6 decades ago, when a subway cost, what do you think a subway ride cost? 15 cents. Ted was already advocating for using bridge tolls to underwrite mass transit fares. Robert Moses immediately blasted the idea as illegal. But the city and the state lined up behind the Kiel plan, and soon thereafter came the new MTA and the introduction of precisely the subsidies that Kiel had proposed. And it's fair to say that he had the vision very, very early in the day to grasp the crucial importance of mass transit. He was concerned about what he called, quote, the fundamental conflict between development and the environment, which also inspired him to establish the Institute for Sustainable Cities, which we are very proud to say is housed here at Hunter College. And it also moved him to create the Nurture Nature Foundation, say that 5 times too fast, the Nature Nurture Foundation to promote environmentally sensitive development. Today, the foundation is led by his son, Robert Kiel, who follows in his father's footsteps as a super lawyer, gifted mediator, and vigorous defender of the environment. We are delighted to welcome Bob tonight on Zoom, and right here tonight, Ted Kiel's daughter, Jane Kiel Stanley. Thank you so much for your generous support of the Kiel program. We are proud to bear the name here at Roosevelt House. I'm also told that tomorrow is the 110th anniversary of Ted Kiel's birth. True? Okay. Thank you so much for your support of this program. And since we launched it, Our Gifted Keel programs have included former New York State Director of Operations Howard Glaser, together with Charles Komanoff, one of the architects of the state's new congestion pricing law. And thanks to Charlie, who served as the Keel Fellow twice, our students had front row seats for true policy development. This semester, we were honored to welcome back the one and only Sam Schwartz, the one-time New York City traffic commissioner who invented the term we have all used for a half century to kvetch about, that's a technical term, about the traffic congestion that generations of public officials have tried but failed to fix. That phrase is, of course, gridlock. Oh, you're such a responsive audience. Thank you. Sam learned about gridlock firsthand in one of his first jobs as a New York City cab driver, and later he became a pioneer in advocating for bike lanes and pedestrian plazas long before they were taken seriously. In short, you were a visionary advocate, imagining a city of breathable air, of safe, walkable streets where pedestrians, not vehicles, had the right of way, and mass transit, not cars, were the people movers of choice. I was delighted to learn that Sam is a CUNY alum. Alas, you're not perfect. It was Brooklyn College. But he made up for that one lapse by serving 2 stints at Hunter as a Keel Fellow, where he's been a great teacher and a great mentor. So it certainly looks like this is the year of congestion pricing. Whether we favor it, whether we dread it, or a little bit of both, no one disputes that we need to fully understand it, its origins, its benefits, and its consequences. So to understand it, we're here tonight for our annual Keel Public Program, and Sam has assembled an extraordinary expert panel. But before I call Sam up, I would like to direct your attention to a 1969 clip from a press conference with Mayor Lindsay, Mr. Keel, and Nobel Prize winner, the economist William Vickrey, who seems to have been the first person to think of congestion pricing, and was actually retained by Ted Keel to help him write a report on transportation for the mayor. So we're going to show the clip, and then after the clip, Sam's going to come up and then introduce our speakers. Thank you very much.
The question of transportation in general is Theodore Keel. I asked him some time ago, to the basis of a continuing examination he was making of the problem of funding mass transit and mass transportation in New York, to collect on a piece of paper his thinking on this subject based on the studies that he has made, and to give them to me. I announced to the public and to the press that I would encourage him to release to the public any such memorandum that he might prepare. Mr. Keel has been ably assisted by Professor William Vickrey of Columbia University, transportation and a transportation planner and an economist. And I would like to turn this meeting now over to Ted Keel for a discussion of the report which he has today issued and which I believe has been distributed to the press.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I am pleased to submit this report to you entitled, A Balanced System of Transportation is a Must. And I was more than assisted by Professor Vickrey. He has likewise prepared a report entitled Transit Fare Increases a Costly Revenue, and has made an analysis which is the predicate for my report to the mayor. I propose increasing the tolls on bridges and tunnels operated by the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority and the Port Authority. Doubling the tolls on the TBTA would bring in an additional $25 million a year. In the case of the Port Authority, it would bring in an additional $70 million a year, which of course would have to be shared with New Jersey, something that I've tried to make clear and the Port Authority continues conveniently to overlook. Second, increase registration fees for New York vehicles. An average increment of $20 would yield $135 million for a mass transportation fund. Third, increase the gasoline tax by 1 cent a gallon to produce $35 to $50 million. Fourth, impose a levy on charges in parking lots and on garages in New York City to raise $15 million a year. Hopefully, this should be done, if it is administratively possible and legally possible, on parking lots and garages in congested areas so as to relieve the conditions of hypercongestion which we've discussed. Fifth, which is a long-term proposal, initiate a tri-state approach with an agency vested with policy-making power over all forms and agencies of transportation.
Proposals would be fair to the people who drive their cars into New York City.
Yes, I do.
Support these proposals.
I do support these proposals. I think this is a very well worked out plan which can save the 20-cent fare. As Mr. Keel and Professor Vickery have stated, the motorist is heavily subsidized today, very heavily subsidized by public monies. And the program that is suggested by Mr. Keel here places a very, very small tax on the automobile in order to assist the automobile rider as well as the mass transit rider, because it will tend to reduce congestion on the highways and on the roads. Even with the Keel proposal here in effect,
That was wonderful. When that was being broadcast, and when that happened, I was driving a yellow cab in New York City, and I would have loved to have some traffic relief at that time. So it's really great to see your father, Jane, and a leader of the city come back to life, and William Vickery, who was considered the father of congestion pricing. So, thank you, President Kirshner, and thank you to the Ted Keel family for sponsoring the Keel program at Roosevelt House. There was a third time. I think I was the inaugural Keel Fellow, and then the last two years. Now, I never had the privilege of working with Ted Keel. During those days, I was a relatively minor figure within the traffic department, but I worked in the Lindsay administration and worked on some of these plans. One of the greatest ideas that you could see from that was the concept of thinking of our region as a tri-state region. Instead, we put up the walls. Now, I think Governor Murphy's going to take that one thing where Ted Keel says, yeah, New Jersey should get some of the money. So you might find this in the exciting dramas we're seeing in the courts nowadays. I don't know if it'll do better than the current downtown trial, but we'll see. I also had the honor of being pestered by William Vickery. When I was city traffic commissioner, there would be this guy who looked like a professor from Columbia University with his tweed jackets and the arm patches, and he was pestering me to do congestion pricing. And I listened to him in 1980, and I tried it and was promptly sued by the AAA and the Garage Board of Trade. The Garage Board of Trade, which, by the way, practices congestion pricing. They just didn't want the government to do it. The city lost the lawsuit, and Vickery would go on to win the Nobel Prize in Economics, and sadly, he passed away just a few days after that. This plan, the congestion pricing plan, and I'm going to briefly get into the details, was really pushed through by Andrew Cuomo in 2019, and now he's an opponent. It's not the right time to do it. In the 50 plus years that I've worked on it, it's always not been the right time to do it. This is the right time. Now, we're going to have in the beginning, I will show you a couple of slides. I don't know if this clicks and shows the slides that will explain what the plan is to you. And then we will have our panelists come up, and they come from disparate backgrounds, which we tried to have some kind of balance, including our beloved MTA. We have a representative from there, and someone who represents the MTA's customers, the riders, and another person who's worked long to advance low-income New Yorkers, and a business person who is concerned about the impact of congestion pricing on theaters, restaurants, and other businesses. And now I'll introduce the panel, and then maybe I'll introduce the panel after I do this so you can all see what I'm talking about over here. It's just 3 slides in addition to this cover slide. Do we have congestion in New York City? Well, yeah, we really do. No question about it. And let me try to move this along. Oh, the clicker does it. Yes, a lot of words here. And even with all these words, I don't have some of the finer points there. And thank you to Juliet Michelson, who's constantly improving and giving me tips where I get things wrong. And that's much appreciated. But essentially, the plan is to charge all vehicles entering. That's why it's underlined. Not leaving. I get lots of questions about leaving. South of 60th Street. So it's the solid lines, not that other line, which is a different program for congestion relief also. Now, a revenue goal was set, and a lot of people thought that wasn't a good idea. It should be a congestion goal, a speed goal, an air pollution goal, or some other kind of goal. But the brilliance of setting the dollar goal is the panel that was evaluating exemptions said every time you exempt somebody, everybody else has to pay more. Otherwise, we would have had a program with 100 exemptions and one person paying, I don't know, $200 to come in. The 80% of the money will go to the subways and buses, 20% to the railroads, 10% to Metro North, 10% to the Long Island Railroad. The peak rates are $15 for cars, trucks, depending on size, $24 to $36. The off-peak rates are $3.75 for cars and trucks, $6 to $9. It's a quarter of the peak rates. The taxis, $1.25 a trip. In that zone, there's already a congestion charge south of 96th Street, a little too much to add on to here. And the apps, meaning an Uber and a Lyft, $2.50 per trip. And no, they don't pay when they enter the zone. They pay, it's added on to the passenger's bill. There are some credits. 4 tunnels serve the Central Business District, the CBD. And those 4 tunnels get a $5 exemption for cars and $12 to $20 for trucks. There are some exemptions. If you stay on the FDR Drive or the West Side Highway the entire way, you go from Brooklyn to Upper Manhattan, or you go to the Bronx, you don't get a charge. However, if you use city streets to do it, you will be charged. I know it's a little confusing. Some other exemptions involve vehicles transporting disabled. Low-income residents get a 50% discount after 10 trips per month. Government-owned vehicles and public commuter buses will also be exempt. There's a New York City tax credit for CBD residents with income of less than $60,000. My guess is quite a few billionaires will show up with a tax return saying, I've got a loss and I want the exemption on it. Mark my words. Start date right now is June 30th, 2024, but we will hear from the MTA soon on how likely that is, I guess. And now the rhetoric, a lot of it is coming from the New York Post, but from others, if you follow the Post, this will kill people literally. It will kill business. It will kill the economy. It's another pothole. People will flee New York. The lawsuits, 7. We got one last week, the town of Hempstead. And these are making their way through the courts. Now, over 100 groups asked for exemptions, whether you're an artist, a caretaker, pills, pools, you could see it. This is just a partial list. I always thought they should give exemptions to veterans of Woodstock 1969. It didn't make, oh, boy, David, you and I have a lot of things in common. Okay, this is the last slide. When William Vickery would speak of congestion pricing, his idea was that space was a commodity and price it correctly. but you need two ingredients. You need congestion and you need good transit options. When I started putting this slide, I reached out to Juliet on it. There are more than 200 ways you could take a bus, you could take a train, a railroad into the central business district. It's just phenomenal. So it's got the two ingredients that are needed. Congestion is at 5 miles an hour in Midtown, and this is post-pandemic, it got worse, and 7 miles an hour in the central business district as a whole. It used to be about 30% higher than that just in 2010. So we've slowed down. If you think traffic is worse than it's ever been, you're right. So at this point, I will turn it over. I will introduce the panelists. And the first panelist is, and the panelists could come up as I introduce you, Juliet Michelson. She's the Deputy Chief in Policy External Relations at the Metropolitan. Now, I must say, when she first sent it over to me, I don't know if it's a Freudian slip, but she called it the Metropolitan Transformation Authority. And I think you are. I think you are transforming things. So I thought that was great. She advises the MTA chair on high-profile issues, including congestion pricing. She's my congestion pricing go-to person. She was executive vice president at the Regional Plan Association. Full disclosure, I'm a board member, and she was absolutely terrific, and it was a big loss for RPA, but a big gain for the city. And she corrects me, and I appreciate that. So thank you for that. Let's have a round of applause for Juliet. Now, Betsy Plum and I have been scheming on congestion pricing as far away as the island of Aruba. And she's the executive director of the Riders Alliance. If I had to say who put us over the top, who badgered Governor Cuomo relentlessly, it was the Riders Alliance, and they really got it over the hump. Charlie and I just were in the ICU with congestion pricing, just keeping a heart beating. Prior to that, she spent 15 years in the immigrant rights field and served as vice president of the New York Immigration Coalition. She has an impressive list of transportation victories, from campaigning for buses and trains improvements and a historic campaign in Albany to win more frequent bus service and faster and more reliable bus service. Additionally, Betsy and her team have been instrumental in advocating for congestion pricing, and she did all this while having a baby just 2 months ago. So let's hear it for Betsy. Now, David Jones, as I'm getting to know David a little better, I'm realizing that a lot of things. You were that guy in the next tent with the hair down. I remember you. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, did it back up? Oh, boy. Yeah, so David is the president and CEO of the Community Service Society and a longtime advocate for the economic advancement and full civic participation of low-income New Yorkers. He was special advisor to Mayor Ed Koch. It's another thing that we have in common. We both worked for Koch and served as executive director of the New York City Youth Bureau. He's the former chair of Carver Federal Savings Bank, the nation's largest African-American savings bank, and an emeritus trustee of Wesleyan University. He's born in Bed-Stuy, another Brooklyn boy. I was next door in Brownsville, and it's just great to have another Brooklyn guy. And he's a member of the New York State and federal bars. So let's welcome David. And Christine Nicholas is another lifelong New Yorker, and she has fought for the city in so many different ways. She's chair of the Broadway Association, and they invited me to speak on congestion pricing a dozen years ago when there's barely a whimper, barely a heartbeat on it. She's dedicated to the betterment of neighborhoods along the Broadway corridor from south of Madison Square Garden to Columbus Circle. She's a former mayoral press secretary. To me, she was one of the most powerful women in the city during that time. A lot of respect for her, and served as CEO of New York City and Company from 1999 to 2007 before co-founding Nicholas and Lentz Communications, an award-winning PR, what a list of clients, marketing and government affairs firm based in Midtown Manhattan. Let's hear it for Christine. And now, what we'll do is each person will take, let's say, 10 minutes or so and talk from their various perspectives. Of course, the MTA, the riders, the low-income New Yorkers, the business people. So I think it's a good perspective we're going to get. We're going to try to run till about 7 o'clock, and then we're going to take questions, not statements, from the audience. So let's keep it lively. And no complaints about the 6 train today, okay? So let's turn it over to Juliet.
Hello, everybody. So happy to be here with you. And thanks for the very generous introduction. It has been a long time since we've known each other, actually.
Yeah.
So yes, as Sam said, 53 days until this program, who's counting? Until this program goes live after so many years, so many steps in the relay race. I think of this as a relay race, so many people involved bringing us to this point. It's really exciting. And we can talk about the details of the program. You went over the big ones, but in this moment when there's a lot of negative coverage in the paper, or just more and more people are coming to realize what is about to happen and have questions or concerns, I thought that maybe this is just for like my own self therapy, but I thought it would actually be helpful to remember why this came to be. Okay, so Sam mentioned this was a law passed by the state legislature at the urging of Governor Cuomo in 2019. And if you remember sort of where New York was at the moment, so this was just a few years after Uber and Lyft had come on the scene. E-commerce was taking off. New York's population had been growing steadily. Tourism had been growing. And the streets were just really, really congested. In 2010, I wrote this down, in 2010, travel speeds were, oh shoot, I didn't write that down. I wrote down that they went down 23% between 2010 and 2016. So they were, on average, below 60th Street, under 7 miles an hour in 2017, and then even under 6 miles an hour the following year. And just under 5 miles an hour in Midtown. Just very, very slow, and a very sort of rapid change over a few years. We've forgotten now, right? Like we've sort of gotten used to this new state of congestion. So, you know, it's not good for quality of life, not good for air pollution, not good for business. At the time, the New York City Partnership put out a report saying, you know, calculating the time lost sitting in traffic, 1,700 hours a year on average for the average New Yorker. At this regional scale, it added up to $20 billion a year in wasted time sitting in traffic. Not good for the economy. And of course, bus service is slow, paratransit service is slow. Emergency services are slow, ambulances, police cars, et cetera. So not an ideal state of affairs. At the same time, on the transit side, there was, everybody remembers, the 2017 Summer of Hell. It was initially just an Amtrak issue. They had had several derailments. It then sort of somehow, maybe coincidentally, also became an MTA issue. There were track fires, there were subway malfunctions, there were yeah, okay, you have a little bit on it. So I won't, so you know, and a lot of overcrowding. So again, this is 2017, a lot of people living in New York. And that year, only 65% of subways reached their destination on time. Just for comparison, today we're over 80. So, you know, a big, in fact, anyway, on my subway ride here, I got stuck on a very crowded train that was moving slowly, and I was getting flashbacks to 2017. And our friends at Riders Alliance started hashtag Cuomo's MTA. And when you say that, you know, you provided the push, like that really was meaningful because everybody at the time, I think, was confused. Is this the mayoral responsibility? That became very clear that it was Cuomo who had, of course, you know, presidential aspirations at the time. Then there were two derailments on the A line and the G line, I think. And that gave Governor Cuomo the opportunity to declare a state of emergency. He called on the MTA to put together a plan to address, you know, the lack of investment that had sort of accumulated, in part because of his own mismanagement of the agency. And thus was born the Subway Action Plan, which had sort of short-term, mid-term, longer-term strategies to improve service on the subway primarily. There were some bus initiatives too. And then Andy Byford came on the scene. Oh, this is all like coming back to us, right? So Andy Byford came on the scene, and he took this moment to say, okay, not only do we have to invest in what the nerds, us nerds call state of good repair, but also let's talk about modern signals. Like, let's bring this system into the 21st century. Let's talk about making the system accessible. And he sort of captured people's imagination, both through his like personality and also through this, you know, providing a vision that was about much more than just keeping the system barely working, but actually sort of becoming a better system for a better city. And all of that was happening just at the time that the MTA was gearing up to write its 5-year capital plan, something it does every 5 years. And so both those crises merged at the same time. And so how do you address crippling congestion on the streets and a transit system that needs a lot of investment is congestion pricing. So it was in, I think it was in late 2017 that Cuomo himself said congestion pricing is an idea whose time has come. He engaged, I believe both of you were on Fix NYC, an illustrious panel of experts to sort of, you know, provide guidance, how to move forward, et cetera. And sort of one thing led to another, and by the time the spring of 2019 came around, there was enough political momentum, and Cuomo, of course, was a force of nature, to get the state legislature to pass congestion pricing. And in doing that, directing the MTA to lead the effort. Along with New York City DOT and New York State DOT, we have partners. You know, we're doing it together, but we are sort of the lead agency. And so, you know, I just want to, like, I think that was helpful, right? I mean, for me, it's just really helpful to remind ourselves how we got here, because it's very easy to forget. It wasn't that long ago, but somehow maybe COVID just gave us all group amnesia, that it is possible to live in a city with less traffic. And service has gotten better on the transit system, in part because of the early action items of the Subway Action Plan, in part, frankly, because there are fewer riders. It's easier to run buses and subways on time. But you know, the changes that are needed are still in front of us, right? We still need better accessibility. We still need better signals. We still need to electrify buses. We still need to invest in this system that keeps this very, very unique region where only half of all households own cars going. So that's why we're here, and thank you for listening to us today.
By the way, I can tell you the exact date that Cuomo said it. It was August 13th because my granddaughter was being born then, and I was over watching my other granddaughter while my daughter was giving birth. So it was August 13th, 2017.
Okay, well, I'm going to do a little bit of down history's path as well. But again, I work at Riders Alliance. We're New York's grassroots organization of subway and bus riders. So I want to talk a little bit about who we are and what we do in the context of congestion pricing, and what that summer in particular meant for us, and sort of that shift in strategy and really turning to Cuomo's MTA. So very quickly, how many folks here ride subways and buses? Okay, figured that much. How many folks have had, let's say, less than a wonderful experience when riding subways and buses? You know, a delayed train, a slow bus, an inaccessible station. Why is that? It isn't just because we have a really old system, right? It's more than a century old. It isn't just because more than 1 billion people use it annually. It isn't just because it runs 24 hours a day. Those are all reasons why it's incredible. But we have these really frustrating experiences because of how maintaining a system like ours is or is not a priority of the powers that be. The transit system is by design insulated from our political ecosystem, right? It's insulated from the democratic process, and that's a huge part of what Riders Alliance does and what we seek to change. It is governed by the Metropolitan Transportation or Transformation Authority, the MTA, and as my colleague recently remarked, no one really knows what that is, but everyone knows that they hate it. And that's a little harsh, but it oftentimes is the experience. And that's sort of what it was created to do. So AI helped me last night make this image. I said, put politicians hiding behind the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. And so those are our politicians. One's even a Bush. 2024, everyone. So the MTA creates a really, really convenient foil for politicians. And they can blame the MTA for problems with a basic public service that almost all of us depend on, and really uniquely depend on. And it's actually something that they have a unique power to influence and invest in. So they could say, well, the MTA doesn't have an elevator there. Well, who decided to not give the MTA the money or the priority, or to say, you need to put an elevator there and we're gonna make it happen? So this was a problem that I think really created that summer and many, summers before it, where people were hiding behind the MTA and avoiding the real needs that riders had. And that creates a really poor situation for the riding public. And this is what our work at Riders Alliance is premised on changing. It's premised on the idea that riders know best. Those of us that experience this every single day, we know what these problems are. We know what needs to be fixed. And our theory from day one has been that elected leaders will only act if we make them act. Now, that's not unique to transit. That's every single issue, education, healthcare, whatever it might be. But certainly when it comes to transit, where you have the convenient MTA to hide behind, we have to turn it back to elected leaders. And so our mission is to deliver a reliable, affordable, comprehensive public transit system by organizing subway and bus riders, the people who know best, into an undeniable political constituency. And so that's what we do day in and day out. We believe that people can make great change. They can take challenges, they can make them into opportunities, and surprise, surprise, our people are riders. And so how did that all impact the congestion pricing win? So as Juliet was saying, these are some of the headlines. You always love a New York Post Daily News take on what's going on. It works well. The subway was broken. We had failing 1930s signal technology, 1960s subway cars. This was leading to spiraling delays. We had hundreds and still have hundreds of inaccessible stations, stranding hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers, the slowest buses in America. We still have the slowest buses in America despite the most bus riders. And by that summer, delays had quadrupled. Long waits, and there were rising fares for buses, subways, and paratransit service. And the governor comes out and he said, well, it's going to be a summer of hell, sorry, as if he couldn't or shouldn't have done anything about it. And I think that's one of the things that we also talk about. Sometimes transit is understood like water. Like water's wet, transit's bad. And you know, the thing is, transit is not water. It isn't the weather. It's not, you know, this predestined fate to just be bad. It can change. And that's what we did. And that's what we did that summer. We pulled the problem away from the agency. We assigned it to the person who was responsible, who runs that agency, which is the governor. So that's how we got Cuomo's MTA, which, as Juliet referenced, this was a really big and still is education moment for a lot of New Yorkers. It makes sense that like the city would run our city's public transit system, but it isn't that way. It's all the way up the Hudson in Albany. And so we put it and we educated that it's the governor who controls the MTA. So when you were delayed, it wasn't just because that's the way the world goes. It was because a leader, our governor, decided to not invest in you as a rider. And marrying that reality to the money that could fix the subway, congestion pricing, is what I think made all of the difference. But I think it is really, really important to stress the role that everyday riders had in that change, in demanding better. I think it's easy to look back. It certainly at this point is sort of conventional wisdom to say that, well, broken signals or delayed trains or stations without elevators were what won congestion pricing, right? It was time to fix the subway a few years ago. But problems don't just win solutions, right? Ancient signals did not go up to Albany and knock on policymaker doors. Door problems with the subway didn't prod the governor to act, you know, inaccessible. I'll just finish my last one here. Inaccessible stations didn't join the fight for change. Instead, it was thousands of subway and bus riders organizing. It was taking the idea that Sam and Charlie had on life support. It was joining with organizations like the Community Service Society, David's organization, in coalition. It was getting the support of the business leaders, of real estate leaders, and so many more across the city to say, this is the program that we need. And its time has come, as the governor had said at that point. And so this is just a small snapshot of what that looked like in action. Riders demanded that our needs be addressed. That started in major part with congestion pricing. And I just want to note, to sort of bring us to the moment right now that we're in, the road to congestion pricing, even after victory, has proven really bumpy. The Trump administration sat on New York's application to set up the toll during its final 20 months, like basically saying nothing about what needed to be done at the federal level. Then the pandemic hits and creates the worst fiscal crisis in transit history. We had a very, very exhaustive federal review, which Juliet was a major player in, and even once that started, it was another couple of years of going through every fine detail. And so from the rider perspective, we have had to keep waiting. We've had to keep dealing with a system in desperate need of repair. We have had to stay at the table. We've had to stay motivated through all of that. And in belief that this is a program that has potential, that can change New York. And that's what we're continuing to do. And this is riders across the city. Riders who have some of the most punishing commutes, really difficult lives. Transit is at the heart of that. And together we really do believe that we can make change, that we are making change. And that if anything less than that is done or delivered, it is not just because water is wet. It is a political decision that someone's made. So that's my piece.
Okay. So first of all, let me describe what Community Service Society is. It's 175 years old. I've led it for 36 years, so there's some question whether I might have been actually there at the very beginning. It's getting a little long. It's done some unique things over the years. We founded the Columbia School of Social Work. We founded the Hospital of Special Surgery. We provided the prototype for Social Security. Francis Perkins was trained by us. So there's a long historical work, basically focusing on the working poor of New York. More recently, for many of us in this audience, more appropriately, we're the Ombuds program for all ACA in the state of New York. If you get a denial by health insurance, our number is listed. Whether you're private pay or you're Medicaid or Medicare, we can take you through it. And we've served almost 250,000 people in the years we've been in operation. More recently, we created something called the Education Consumer Debt Counseling, based on the same idea, a statewide program to help people navigate that. And I think we're up to about $30 million in people being saved because they were being abused by their loan servicers. And that program is supported by the governor and the legislature. But let me tell you how we got involved with the transit issue. And it started out with a report we do every year called the Unheard Third. We became concerned. You know, I grew up in Crown Heights and Bedford-Stuyvesant in the 50s and 60s. I'm somewhat removed from what's happening on the ground. And over my objection, I thought it was ridiculous, we began surveying about 20 years ago using the standard. We have telephone calls, used a group called Lake Associates, augmented that with phone surveys of various sorts, cell phone and the rest, and began getting a feedback loop with the constituents we were trying to serve. And it led to all sorts of things that we didn't expect. One of the things it led to were people were in distress over the cost of transportation. We were getting a steady flow of information saying, I just can't afford to pay the round-trip fare. My son and daughter are going to community college or college, and they have to do a part-time job. The costs kept mounting and mounting. So armed with this, we went to then Mayor de Blasio, I think in retrospect, much to his regret, to talk about a program that actually Betsy and I have worked on, it's a long time now, called Fair Fares, which was the notion of a half-price fare for people at or below poverty. And that program, while Mayor de Blasio initially supported it, and in fact put me on the board of the MTA, and have to be outright, I'm one of those chills for the MTA. He made me his mayoral appointee to the MTA, and then tried to moonwalk away from the $100 million plus the city would have to pay to finance half-price fare. Because the deal is, the MTA will certainly accept senior discount, all sorts of discount, but if it comes from a city agency or suggestion, it has to be paid for in total by the city. So he objected. Ultimately, we got to the city council, however, and this was Corey Johnson's first term. He was excited by the notion of having a signature thing and supported the initial allocation of Fair Fares. It finally became what it was. Then, of course, we had to try to implement it, and that's where Riders Alliance became the critical part of this thing. Because while we're a sort of researcher and think tank, if you don't have boots on the ground, you can't win. You can't bring it to public officials and get them to move. And it's that collaboration that ultimately led to the passage and pushing of Fair Fares, which is established now. With their help again, we were able to push the number from 100% of poverty, which is about 23,000 for a family of 3, which is ridiculous, to 120% of poverty, which is somewhat ridiculous. It should be much higher, because we've been polling on this, and we're finding not only people below poverty, but people above poverty are reporting the same kinds of problems in paying these basic fares for subways and buses. We have to increase it. And that's where this starts to become interesting. The numbers began to rise right away in terms of who was asking for this. So obviously, 37% of low-income Latino New Yorkers say they couldn't pay this much. And then we had 31% of low-income women across the board and 34% of low-income working women. But it went well beyond the 200%. We were finding people who would be considered moderate income people who were looking at, and the reason this happens, it's not in isolation, of course. The high cost of living in New York, driven by housing costs, make even what seems to be who cares, $290 one way, that can't be anything. If you're paying $3,000 or $4,000 on rent, this starts to become, you're eating into your disposable income. So that led us in turn to navigate into congestion pricing. We were convinced that congestion pricing not only should be encouraged because you'd get more people to take the subways and buses if there were more discounts available, but also it's a necessity, and it was drilled into me by the MTA, like we have here, about the need for the capital improvement of the MTA to make it the best performing transit system in the world. It should be the achievement. And we began looking at that going back into 2017. We did our first report on one of the arguments against congestion pricing. It was going to hurt low-income people. We did an in-depth analysis and found out that approximately 6,000 drivers come into the Central District who are low-income. Virtually nobody out of the hundreds of thousands and millions of people who use the system. And in fact, there's a special discount that I think is reflected for people who are low income, essentially, who make 10 trips or more. So there's already going to be another incentive. We followed that report in 2020. The same kind of situation has occurred. Congestion pricing does not hit the working or lower income people of the city of New York in an appreciable manner. Doesn't mean you don't have to have exemptions. By the way, congestion pricing, even when installed and in motion, is going to be subject to review for people who may be having unforeseen impacts that have to be held. So I think the two come together. The issue of what low-income New Yorkers need in terms of having some kind of discount for traveling on the rail, on subway and buses, and also the needs of the system to have congestion pricing so that we can have a system that's fully robust and can continue and expand in serving working people.
Hi, I'm Christine Nicholas, and tonight I'm wearing my Broadway Association hat. So I am the chairwoman of a 113-year organization, so I'm like the new kid on the block compared to David. But the Broadway Association, when it was founded in 1911, it was for the betterment of the Times Square area, because back then, when they were building the subway, some of the construction workers, they would forget to put the covering or barricades, and people were falling into the hole, right? So the Broadway Association, being a group of businessmen, that's correct, businessmen, they would get together and they would demand action from the city. This organization grew and grew and grew and became this wonderful civic organization along the Broadway corridor. So although it says Broadway Association, it's not just theater, but it's the businesses that make up sort of the entertainment district, if you will, from Madison Square Garden up to Lincoln Center. So fast forward, if you will, 100 years later, I had the opportunity to ask Sam to address the Broadway Association, which meets monthly. We meet at Sardi's. It's a wonderful salon, and we hear from elected officials and leaders on what's happening in the city and, what should we know about. So Sam came along, and he was talking about a ribbon bridge going over to Governor's Island and what was once, congestion pricing. And this all was, remember when we were trying to get the Olympics for 2012? It feels like it was decades ago. So this all kind of came out of that. So Sam had given an idea, which from the wonderful video that we saw was not a new idea, but it was born from, Mayor Lindsay's group, and and this is what I am advocating now. I am not opposed to the concept of congestion pricing, even though many in the Broadway world, many in the business world can see that this is going to be a stress on businesses. There's no doubt about it. Report after report shows that this is going to deter people from coming into the central business district. What I was advocating and still advocate for is that we take it a little bit slower, that it was passed, it's going to happen, but let's put together a plan that I think people can deal with. So it would have been a phased-in approach. That's what I was advocating for, so that it wasn't just on June 29th you pay nothing, on June 30th you're going to get hit with a $15 bill. Now, as David mentioned, that may not impact the 1/3, the very poor in our city. But what it will affect is the hospitality workers, those that are really sort of right on that bubble. They're making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, and we all know that that is very hard to live in our city at that level. And we just thought that if you want a thriving 24/7 city, which we all miss since COVID, this may not have been the best time to implement this. And I know, Sam, you said there's never a good time. We understand it has to happen, but we thought maybe phase it in. So how do you phase it in? Well, you could start by having maybe a lower fare. Get people used to it. Maybe it's $6. Maybe it's double the cost of a Metro card, basically. And then also with the peak and off-peak, we really question why on the weekends, when there really isn't that much congestion, are you still charging? Now, I know that MTA needs money. I'd be the first one. I'm a daily subway rider. I get it. They need money, and the money is going to fix the subways, which we all agree on. But it's going to come at the expense of the businesses that are really struggling to get back on their feet. So we thought maybe phase it in. We also thought this would be an amazing time for New York to reevaluate our toll system. And this is where the Sam from 10 years ago comes in. To me, the MTA, and I testified, they left a lot of money on the table. If you want to raise money, I'm the daughter of a banker. I know how to raise money, and I also raise a lot. Manhattan's an island. It's a luxury and a privilege to come into Manhattan, in my humble opinion, right? But it should be accessible to all. So whether they can get in by subway or bus is fine. But there are some people that desperately need to take their cars, whether they are these hospitality workers that I spoke about, that if you want to be able to get a late night bite or go to a bar or go to the Broadway show, for them to service that, they need to come in at 6 p.m. They're going to get slammed with $15, and they're making $50,000 or $60,000. That's about $5,000 a year extra, and they're not going to get a benefit of this. And I was not testifying for an exemption. What I was suggesting is that when you look at New York, Manhattan as an island, and you look at all the free tolls that you can get to, and I am savvy, I'm sure we all are, how many take the Willis Avenue or the 3rd Avenue to skip the Triborough, right? Okay, yeah, it's okay. It's legal to do that. How many take the 59th Street Bridge, right? Instead of going through the Midtown, right? Okay, we all do that. The Williamsburg, we all do it, and New Yorkers understand it. But what this is going to encourage is toll shopping. What happens with toll shopping, and this gets to the lawsuit that New Jersey is got before the state. The toll shopping will create more congestion in areas that have some of the highest asthma rates in New York City. You're adding more congestion. You're really not alleviating congestion. We'll raise money, and maybe let's call this what it is. This is a fundraising scheme. It's less about congestion mitigation and more about money to go to the MTA, which I support. Okay. But let's face it, this is a way of raising money, and if you really cared, and if we had the opportunity, which I think we still do, to fix this, is let's review it in 6 months' time. Let's see where it works, where it won't work. But let's try to, if you really want to ease congestion, toll every single bridge into Manhattan, but toll it at the same price as a MetroCard. So it's not going to hurt people. It'll alleviate the need for I think some of these exemptions are very important. FDNY needs an exemption. Some of the folks that are coming in for cancer treatments, look at what we've done on the East Side Corridor by building that up as one of the top healthcare communities in the world. But they can't necessarily get on a subway. They can't afford an Uber, which is going to get more expensive. But they can afford $2.90 to go over the 59th Street Bridge, which means that we would be getting more money for the subways at less pain. So, and remember, I mean, I love how, Juliet, thank you for giving us the tutorial. The thing that will not be addressed on this at all is all the congestion outside of 60th Street. So when you're sitting behind 2 FedEx trucks or delivery trucks, this is not going to do anything to alleviate that congestion. And I think instead, there should have been something about road congestion. This is all going to rail and bus. I mean, so yeah, but on Park Avenue, on Madison, which is a 1-lane street now, none of that was taken into consideration. And with the proliferation of Uber and Lyft under the Bloomberg administration, that was insane. 13,000 medallions, right? And we were so strict about that over the administrations. Every administration never, lifted the medallions. It was very hard to do that. But overnight, anybody who said that they wanted to be a livery cab driver, they were granted a permit. That put 90,000 more cars into the central business districts. That was not addressed at all in this plan. So look, not opposed to congestion pricing, but there is so much more work to be done. And with the leadership that you see up here, I know if they pool together their resources and their energy, it can be done and it would be better for all. Thank you.
Okay, that was terrific. All 4 of you were excellent. We're going to take questions, not statements again. Yes, you'll get the mic will come around.
Good. Hello, I'm Helene Goldfarb, and I'm not sure what I think about congested pricing. I was a driver for maybe 90 years. I've stopped because I don't think you should drive when you're my age. But I really cannot use public transportation. So how will the taxi and limousine service, or however does it, make it possible for me to come to Hunter College and not pay the $1.25 more, since I'm not going below 60th Street?
If you're not going below 60th Street, you won't pay the charge.
I want to know
the question is, you're coming to Hunter College, you live north of 59th Street,
right?
And how do you avoid the charge? Juliet will tell you.
If you don't cross below 60th Street, you won't pay the charge.
But everything is always on the cab before he drops as soon as
you won't pay the charge.
Okay.
Okay, I'll alternate. This young woman over here. Yes.
Hello, I'm a Hunter alumni. It was $400 per semester when I went to Hunter. I'm a Queens resident, and I'm a motorcyclist rider. So I have several questions. If you come to Queens and you take the 59th Street Bridge, will you have to pay? If you come to Queens, if you come from Queens on the 59th Street Bridge, but get off the Queensboro Bridge and go to Hunter without going below 60, will I have to pay?
So the legislation that was passed in 2019 specified pretty clearly what the boundary should be. 60th Street, including 60th Street, excluding the peripheral highways, excluding the Hugh Carey Tunnel and the roadways connecting the Hugh Carey Tunnel. There's like a few lines about what is in the boundary. This legislation was written by, you know, people who are not transportation experts, who did probably not consult Sam Schwartz on the
That's for sure.
specific car movements. And I will admit there are a couple of quirks to how the boundary is drawn. And one of them I'm sure you're aware of, which is why you're asking the question, that if you are driving from the north, headed to the Queensboro Bridge, you hit a city street for not long at all before you turn east onto the bridge. If you're coming from Queens over the bridge and you're headed north, you can just stay on a highway until 62nd Street and you don't pay the toll. It is a quirk. The system is not perfect. I totally get it. Yes.
And I have another question about the fare, because I saw cars, I saw truck, I didn't see motorcycle.
Motorcycles are half. 750.
Okay. And I have
Let's
okay, and
get other people an opportunity. We'll go on this side. This man back here.
Hi, guys. Can you see this photo?
Yes.
What do you think that is? I want to show it to everyone in the room. There's three men. I would say they're 32, 33, 34 years old. I was at the 92nd Street West Side subway stop.
Speak into the mic.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Hi. Great, thank you.
Hey.
So I was at the, on Tuesday, I was at the 92nd Street subway stop. Okay? These three men jumped the turnstile. I was impressed because they went over it like lickety-split. Not even a flinch. Okay? They're seriously athletes. They're all Caucasians. I would say that I take the subway a lot because although I have a car in the city and I'm on the west side, on Lincoln Center, I'm one block north of the 60th Street. I had nothing to do with it. You guys picked the street. But getting around the subway is really easy. It's really amazing. I mean, I had a policy of never going south of 42nd Street until I went down to the Village the other day. And it was really thick. What are you doing? How much money is being lost by fare abusers on the MTA? And what are you doing to recover it?
So you're getting into one of my areas that I've been, to say the least, obsessed by. When I came on the board of the MTA now 9 years ago, I got the crime statistics of who was being stopped for fare evasion and who was being arrested. 95% of the people stopped and 95% of the people arrested were people of color. In fact, the major hemorrhaging that's going on is all across the city. And all I was saying, give me equity here. But there's a problem here. There's a cultural problem that has been building up for a long time in the police department. And I actually talked to an officer off the record. I didn't even take his name. The difficulty is we're still into broken windows ideas. There's been a merger in the public's mind between violent crime and fare evasion. And you may have seen in the paper today, at least 4 officers are almost getting $400,000 a year just for overtime work for, working in the MTA. And the focus now has been ratcheted up to deal with fare evasion, but almost exclusively in some of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. They're going after migrants now. Now, look, I don't want migrants jumping turnstiles either, but to give them a $100 fine when they don't have any work, it's not going to be a recovery for the MTA, but it does help the crime statistics. Look how many people I stopped. Look how many people I arrested. I think there is a issue here that we have to address. That is this a process of trying to recover money? And in fact, the worst place of all is on the buses. That's the major hemorrhage, even more so than the subways. And it's concentrated particularly in Staten Island, where I don't know if there's ever been an arrest. So the issue becomes, and there's a reason. I talked to Staten Island, people got upset after one of my speeches on this. We have a free ferry service. We have a rail line that goes through, which is very difficult even to get a ticket because they don't have enough machines, and at the very end you can pick something up. And there's also the time, during COVID, we stopped collecting money on the buses. Now we've shifted, and people, you gotta be kidding. Local 100, who represents the bus drivers, after a couple of violent incidents where they tried to force people to pay on the fare, were assaulted, they say, that's it. We drive the bus. We open the door, we close the door. We're not the fare collectors. They have to come up with a system, I think, like London, where there's a guy, not paid a lot, ticket takers. They get, I don't know if you've been on the London bus system, they come around and they do it. And if someone really objects, you have a radio and you call next stop, you know, officer, would you come and help me? Not making this the major threat. When you talk to people, my daughter, me to a lesser extent, ride the subway a lot to work. She's not worried about fare evasion. She'd like people walking up and down the, you know, the station and walking up and down the corridors of the subways to protect them. But we've become obsessed with fare evasion. And if you ask the public that roll, who are the fare evaders? It's black and Latino kids jumping over. Yeah, but it's not. It's everywhere. I've been at stations, 14th Street, Wall Street. I mean, it's endemic. But this focus that's really targeted, essentially low-income black and brown kids, is not fair, and they know it, and it's not equitable. And if we're going to solve the fare evasion problem, we have to make it equitable throughout the system. Don't let the kids off, but let's get people who have obviously means of and resources who just see a slam gate open. So you know, this is something that's bugged me for 9 years now, and I brought it up again and again. It has not changed yet. And it's basically because we've got this weird system. The MTA controls the MTA. The NYPD controls the policing in the system. And at the moment, the message hasn't come through.
Now, Ted Keel did have a solution and commissioned Charlie Kamenoff to look at free transit. And that's a study you can get from Charlie. Okay, let's try to stick to congestion pricing questions. That gentleman all the way in the back.
Hello. I guess I have a question for Christine. You mentioned that if the congestion pricing might negatively affect businesses south of 60th. So I guess my question is, if the congestion pricing incentivizes metro or tram usage, couldn't it be argued that the money saved from you know, the commuters that they're not paying in these fares and stuff could be diverted to the economy in that part of the city, and it could essentially bolster that part of the city? Also, I'm a hopeful future New Yorker, but I don't live here, so I don't even know what we're talking about. I just thought this was interesting, you know. So
First honest man we've met. Okay. Yeah. Anybody want to, Christine?
Are you a Hunter student? Are you?
I live in Philly.
Okay.
I lived in Kyrgyzstan like 2 months ago.
Wow. Well, welcome home. Welcome back. Okay. I don't know about diverting the money because it's going to cost much more money. Look, the idea for congestion pricing is to incentivize people to take mass transit, which is hopeful. There are some people who just cannot take mass transit. When you look at the Broadway, now I'm going to get into the theater, I'll wear my theater cap, because when you look at the folks that are primarily going to Broadway, they tend to skew a little bit older. They tend to not, you know, we're working on it. We are trying very hard to diversify and you know, youngerfy the audience. But right now, the reality is we're 20% down from where we were pre-COVID. So we had 14 million tickets sold before COVID, and now we're celebrating 12 million. When you look at the attractions and restaurants, it certainly feels crowded in Times Square. It's still down. So this could be, and the businesses are just very concerned. There's also a bus exemption for commuter buses, which is great. School buses, terrific. But think about, the buses that come from the tourist day trip buses. That's keeping 45 cars off the street, but they're not getting any exemption. So, we're here to try to build up and, the tourism economy, which pumps, it's good for 430,000 jobs here in New York City and $35 billion a year. So it's an important aspect of our economy. But, that wasn't thought of. So, but thanks for your question.
Okay, we'll take 3 more. Is that okay? Do we have time for 3 more? This gentleman over here. Wait till you get the mic.
As a driver from New Jersey into New York, at times using Verrazano Bridge, BQE, Holland Tunnel, and Lincoln Tunnel, and then are there going to be charges, double charges, maybe the $5 to the tunnels, and then you have to go on certain streets to get to FDR, to get from Lincoln Tunnel to West Side Highway. So what is the situation involved with that? Is there, are we going to be charged?
Well, you're going to come across the Goethals Bridge
No,
into the Verrazano?
Verrazano Bridge,
Okay.
BQE, Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, want to get onto FDR, want to get onto West Side Highway. So what is it? Are you going to be
You won't. You'll pay at the Battery Tunnel, but you won't pay if you continue north on the West Side Highway.
Well, how do you get to the North
Street?
West Side Highway without going on one of the streets?
Yeah. Well, those streets are considered part of the West Side Highway, and you won't get charged if you go north of 60th, or if you came out of the Battery Tunnel and snaked around and took the underpass to the FDR Drive, and you continued past 60th Street, you won't be charged.
How is this being monitored?
Oh, there are devices, sensors that are all over the place. We have 2 more questions. Someone way in the back, and was there any way in the back? It was the woman, yeah.
I just wanted to ask, somebody said monitored. I'd like to know how the money that's coming in from congestion pricing will be monitored, or who will be overseeing that money and how it's being used for capital expenses. And when you add, I just want to say quickly to you, when you add educators who live in New Jersey, who have to be at school at early hours, who are not making a lot of money, but above that are also impacted.
Well, that's why the UFT is part of the lawsuit, because, they don't choose which school, they're told which school, and if they get assigned where they're forced to drive, which many of them have to drive, I don't know, the educators never made it into the exemption though, right? Okay, so this is why more work needs to be done.
But look, sorry, I know you want to say something, but just say, I worked with a group of 5 individuals who came up with the toll structure, people outside the MTA. And their thinking really was, look, this program has 2 goals. One is reducing traffic, and one is raising money. And the more exemptions you give, the more discounts you give, the less effective the program is at either of those goals. So there are 6 programs. There's a low-income discount. There's an exemption for emergency vehicles, for specialized government vehicles, for vehicles carrying people with disabilities, for organizations carrying people with disabilities. And commuter buses, I'm sorry. And that's it. So they were very, very limited. I understand there are lots of individual cases and look, I sat through 18 hours of public testimony. I heard a lot of people who are getting caught in a odd situation. They built a life here. This is an expensive city. I totally get it. But the bigger picture is that 85% of people who work in the CBD take public transportation. 11% drive. Those people are not typically a low income. They're typically the higher income people who drive. Yes, there are exceptions, teachers, et cetera, because they get free parking. All of the money coming in, everything will be on open data. We've committed to not just traffic patterns, air quality, but also revenue, expenses. Everything is going to be on open data.
I was just going to say, one of the things that we were really proud of fighting for when all of this was going is that the money would be lockboxed. And so the money is lockboxed and has to be spent. And I know you're shaking your head, but this is what Riders Alliance cares about too, is that every last dollar go to the projects that need to be invested in. And that's the next thing that our members are talking about, is how do we assure that? And we're very happy that it's lockbox, but we will be assuring that, because that's money that we fought for to fix the subway.
Okay, last question, this gentleman over here.
The estimate is that there'll be more than 100,000 cars, vehicles that will not enter the central business district. Will the MTA compensate the city for the money that's lost in revenue from parking meters? No. The city will lose revenue on its end from the people that come in and park on the street and pay $5 an hour or $13.50 for 2 hours.
I mean, the city is a partner with the MTA on this program. They also have an interest in clear streets with traffic that moves. They have an interest in bus lanes that work well, and taxi and emergency services. Their ambulances and police cars have to move. They're a partner with us on this. I understand.
I was in charge of those dollars, and I loved going to the coin counting facility when they had that. But the city is, as Juliet says, on board. There will be some revenue changes, and I don't think the parking revenue is going to be that huge. Quite a bit of parking will be going into off-street parking and garages, so there will be revenue. There's a hefty, I think it's almost 19% tax in the central business district. More cars will be going to the garages, also in some of the other neighborhoods. Laz Parking in Brooklyn is now advertising, park here, and it'll be $25 instead of $15 go if you went further in and then had to pay for parking. But there could be so many questions. So, I know I'll stick around for a couple of minutes if you have some questions, but I just want to thank the panelists. You guys were terrific. You